Hey everyone, welcome back to another week of The Followers. This is episode 29, and this week we've got another guest for you. So, this week's guest is Karol Dillon. He's a native of Listowel in County Kerry, and I suppose just to kind of give a brief overview of his more recent work. He's completed his master's in sports performance in UL, where he took a look at bilateral play in intercounty Gaelic footballers. But he has a lot more behind him than that. So, Karol, I'll pass it over to you to give us a little bit of background on yourself, your basically everything that's gotten you to this point, your influences and whatnot.
Right, Demo, Shane, John, thanks for having me on. So yeah, my background would be quite varied. I mean, I played football growing up, Listowel Emmets, Field Rangers, St. Michael's. I would have been development squad level footballer at under 16 level. And then, as the joke goes, I stopped growing. And then, but then I suppose I have a business background, went back to Mary I in my mid 20s and became a primary school teacher. And I suppose over the last 10 years, from my mid 20s to mid 30s, I was doing a lot of coaching in primary level. And that really was where the seed was sown for my coaching and my interest in going back to college and doing the masters, because I found lads, like as the years were going by, I was spending more and more time out in the field with the boys and girls, coaching them. And it wasn't really a case of here's the ball, lads, here's the bibs, off you go. Like the school went from, and it is something I'd be quite proud of. The school went from Dillon National School, a school that had never won anything, to won numerous coming and Munster in Kerry, won two Munster skills competitions. And that all came about just through hard work and creating a culture and proper coaching, I believe, as well. And as I said to you earlier in the week, as the years go by, I used that as a almost a laboratory to explore my own coaching methods and techniques and to see what works, what doesn't work. And it became very apparent to me that the best players, both boys and girls at that age, were bilateral and were doing athletics in their local athletics club. So the runners, we'll call them, and they may not necessarily have been very fast runners, but they used to glide. They used to glide over the ground, and their running efficiency was just superb. Um, and also they used to play basketball, they used to play soccer, and it wasn't just one. It was numerous examples year after year after year. And you play opposition teams in 11, 12 years of age, and you'd find out, Jesus, Johnny over there for the other team, who's he? You'd ask about him, and you'd find out he's playing all these sports, he's doing athletics, he's doing cross country. Um, and you see, Jesus, yeah, there's a serious pattern developing here. And you would see that the non dominant side was huge. Now, I will say, then, as my name became a bit more prominent in North Kerry over the last few years, you do get asked to get involved in more and more teams. And when I got involved in 2019 with Field Rangers with Paul Galvin, Noel Kennelly, Brian Scanlon. So Noel and Brian would have played with Kerry. Paul obviously played with Kerry. There was a big push on the non-dominant side then with that team. Um, and I know with Brian Scanlon, he's worked with Kerry development squads. I'd be constantly asking him what they'd be doing with the development squads. And with development squads over the years, I think, initially with Kerry development squads, I can't speak for other counties, there was a big push about winning. But then they changed that to more literally developing and improving players. And if they won underage competitions, so be it. So they have now, I know from talking to Brian, they have brought in a lot of skill assessments, a lot of work on the non-dominant side. And he said that there's no question you have to be more bilateral to play for Kerry underage teams than you would have been at his time growing up. So definitely, anyway, 2019 was a big year for me in terms of tickling the mind and the non-dominant side again at that level. Then what happened was the direction of my teaching, I kind of decided this wasn't fulfilling me anymore. I found that I was more ambitious in terms of football. I had a serious passion for it. I was getting a little bit bored by it, and the opportunity to do the MSc in sport performance came up. Applied for it. I didn't have a sports science degree, so I had to write out, the 1,000-word essay as to why I'd be suited, etc. Luckily enough, I had a few good references, and started at January 2020. Got 7 good weeks in Limerick before COVID took over, and but the one significant thing before going to different modules, I will say, was the thesis titles came out in March, and it was very strange actually, because someone on a previous management team, so people will listen to this and say bilateral, and they'll be like, "Oh Jesus, you're mad, pretentious." And I remember the first time I'd heard that term, I had that reaction. I was like, "All right, bilateral, like, you know what I mean?" And I was like, "Why don't you just say the bad side, like, you know?" So life comes at you fast, Damo, because I saw the thesis titles and it was the study of bilateral play and intercounty. I was like, "I have to do it." That was the end of that. And I'd say I nearly hunted down the supervisor there that day. So I'm doing it. And in fairness, it was quite an open title. It had to be elite, but we had a good discussion. It could have been quantitative, which would have involved sports code and video analysis, or it could have been the direction I brought it in. So it morphed into the direction I brought it into. And that just went from step to step to step. Some people saw their thesis titles and didn't really look at it again for months. But because I was fascinated by it, I was doing exams, I was doing assignments, but I was constantly thinking about the thesis in the background. I was always asking players who played at high levels, "What do you think about this?" And some of those informal conversations were priceless in terms of framing my research going forward.
And and Karol, before we kind of dig more into the sports performance masters and your actual thesis, just to touch a little bit more on your background, you mentioned there with Dillon National School that without having a major history of it, he started winning more, particularly through a culture change. Now, in changing and framing that culture, was your, and you mentioned it there in the Kerry development squads, the focus on winning, was it a focus on development and the byproduct of that was just winning more? Or did you start saying, well, let's try and win a little bit here and create a bit of a buzz from that? Or did both kind of go hand in hand?
That's a really good question. And I've had debates with people about this. Because in general, I'll get into that in a second. I think it's all very well for people to say it's all about participation. Okay. And I agree. But you have to have an agreement amongst coaches that that's what it is. So by that, I can't be over a team where we all say, "Right, lads, everybody gets a game here today and we're all in Cloud Cuckoo land." And Shane is bringing in a team where we're winning, lads, and that's it. And my team get beaten by 35 points. That creates a big problem in participation where lads will quickly fall off. So it's all very well to talk about participation and everyone getting a game, but I honestly feel, and I feel really strongly about this, there has to be an agreement, or otherwise you're bringing a knife into a gunfight. And then people won't be long quitting because they'll say, we're getting hammered here. Like, so that's the first thing I'll say. What I would say is there wasn't a culture in the school. There wasn't, to be honest, there wasn't a lot of interest in bringing kids out. I mean, Tomás O'Shea famously said, if school systems are working effectively, there isn't a need for development squads. But what is happening is that there's a lack of volunteerism in teaching. And I saw it firsthand. So what was happening, I would have the lads out every lunch break kicking ball. You'd have one ball between two, you have 15, 20 footballs, developing their non-dominant side. That was unheard of. And to be honest, it started from there. It was giving them an opportunity to practice. It was giving them an opportunity to improve. So yeah, it slowly built up over time. From us being competitive, not getting hockeyed, to us getting into finals, losing finals, to us winning. The key thing was we won one final, and it's amazing at that level, whether people want to admit it or not. If boys and girls in first or second class are in the school and they see the boys and girls in fifth and sixth class winning and being paraded in the hall, they want a piece of that action. And you multiply that by 100 if Kerry come in with the Sam Maguire. You know, to me, that's a great advertisement for participation, is to see, Jesus, if we play this game, we can actually feel good about ourselves. We can actually win things. It's not you just want to be competitive. It's not about winning every year. Of course it's not. But I feel you have to give children a chance to be competitive and feel they have a chance. And then it kind of escalates from there, and they feel important, they feel valued, they feel they're a part of something. And when they're in third class, they look up to the boys in sixth class. I really found that now.
I've found sometimes trying to strike that balance between winning and development, and they can go hand in hand quite well. And as you say, the competition you're in and the influence from the other coaches does have a huge bearing on it. That if all of the other teams are playing or schools are playing put out the 7 or 9 biggest players, that does have a big impact on you, who may be trying to develop skills in the smaller players and be willing to take a loss here and there, a tough day or whatever. But if they are so focused on winning, it can just set you back so far. So that shared goal amongst a group, and whether that comes from Kerry County Board, GA as a whole, or whatever sport it is, that's really important to keep in mind on what it is actually you're trying to develop.
I think you kind of see that much clearer kind of in the footballing world. I know the Dutch Football Association, they don't even keep score up until I don't know the exact now, but I think it's under 12s. And like you can see, the results of their academies speak for themselves. Like just getting, I suppose, once you get to that under 12s level, you'll know who actively enjoys football, and then you can put a competitive element into it, because they know they built up the love of the sport, and it's not just based on the team or the area they're from.
But I think as well, people shouldn't underestimate. You see, I feel strongly about competition anyway, because if you put two boys at 6 years of age at one end of the yard and say, right, lads, race there from A to B, they will try and cheat the ready, steady, go. There is an inherent competitiveness in humans and in boys and in girls, you know. Even if you put a ball and a stone in the middle of a yard with children and say, lads, we're playing a game of soccer here, they will start keeping scores. And I've heard of the Ajax thing, and it's fantastic. It really is. And I know Dennis Burkhamp talks about how developing characters and personalities is more important. But I think we can't negate the evolution of humans either, you know. I think humans, by their very nature, are competitive. And boys, like as I say, if you put 2 5-6-year-old boys at one end of the yard and say, right, let's go from A to B, they'll try and pull each other down. You know?
Me and Damon still do that when we race.
We had a player, senior at our club, who said, I was never the fastest from A to B, but I never started from A.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like it's amazing to see it. And I actually said to the children when I used to be teaching them, you know, I'd have an interest in doping, and I'm not saying I used to dope the children here, but I have an interest in the philosophy of doping. And my question to the 5th and 6th class every year would be, right, lads, we have a school quiz. This is an imaginary school quiz. You can see the answers and guaranteed you won't be caught. I can guarantee you will not be caught. And if you see the answers, you're obviously going to win the quiz. Hands up here, who here would cheat? And every year, bar none, it was slightly under 50% who used to put their hand up. And it wasn't just the children you'd expect would be the weakest. And a lot of times it was the very best children, you know. So there is that competitiveness there that we shouldn't underestimate.
As part of Leaving Cert P, I teach that the exam subject, but we do around ethics and drugs in sport, and I usually show him a few videos of Kevin McManaman pulling down Lee Keegan or other little aspects of cheating, and I get him to compare that to Lance Armstrong, and I say, are they both the same? I'm like, oh, no way. So like, obviously if in your game you have to pull someone down, you'll pull them down, but there's no way you can take the drugs. I'm like, but aren't they both cheating? And it's the way they look at it so differently, how they can't equate one with the other and feel one is perfectly acceptable and normal because it's, while not fully encouraged, it's not as actively discouraged in the sport, whereas the doping side, you would hope is.
Have you covered that? That's fascinating that you cover that, because I completely and totally agree with you. I don't see the difference.
I actually wouldn't either, but I'm always surprised at in fifth year, and they're like, no way, like obviously you can pull someone down, but sure, like mainly because they feel the doping as so far in advance premeditated that just because you're putting so much more of an effort into cheating, that pulling someone down spur of the moment is okay. Now I wouldn't agree with that at all, but I'm like, oh, it's interesting the way they're thinking about that.
I mean, if you have like Luis Suarez in the 2010 World, and I'm a Liverpool fan, but in the 2010 World Cup he handballed the ball in the line, right? And didn't they miss the subsequent penalty? But anyway, essentially he got away with it, and Uruguay got over the line because he cheated. So like it is a strange circumstance that's more accepted than if he was caught doping,
and is far more like directly impactful on it. Like you could say, okay, obviously in some sports doping will have far more of a direct impact on the end outcome, weightlifting, cycling, sprinting, stuff like that. In GA, it's very hard to say if a team or a player is that's what's directly impacting their improved performance. Maybe not. I'm not entirely sure. Whereas if you found someone was taking drugs in soccer, rugby, Gaelic football, whatever, you'd be like, oh, complete cheater, they have to be thrown out. Whereas that direct impact of sticking your arm out and stopping the ball, like it crosses such a definitive line. Yet people are more like, oh, it was very smart by him, wasn't
it? Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yeah. So yeah, that was how I got to Limerick. Anyway, that was part of the journey, you know.
Just slightly then, you went and did the were you coaching before you went back to Mary I to do the primary teaching?
I actually wasn't. I kind of I played an awful lot of football growing up until I was like 21, 22. And I was lucky enough to play with guys who went on and played with Kerry and won All-Irelands with Kerry underage. We had a really good team, and I always wanted to play Kerry minor, and I suppose I was on track. I mean, to a certain degree, but come minor, I definitely wasn't tall enough. And after that, then I was like, sure, what's the point? Which was absolutely insane, like, you know what I mean, looking back. But I just thought, sure, there's no point now, and I kind of stopped. So to answer your question, no, I'd lost interest. I was just following football from afar at that point. So it was funny how life worked out. It was just that when I went back teaching, I got, as the token male in the school, I was landed with the football, you know, and that is a problem. And I might get onto it later on. That is a problem at national school level. Is there are women, of course, there are females who do fantastic work in sport, but in the primary school system. But there is a serious lack of males in the primary school system, in the teaching profession, and that does impact on the amount of sport they do at lunchtimes. So what I would say is that I was as the token male, I was given the job, and I said, sure, grand, yeah, you'll do anything to get the job at the start. And very quickly you realize, God, I love this. I absolutely love this. Like, as I say, it became a laboratory for what worked, what didn't work. And it's amazing how much they can take in terms of instructions.
Did you find teaching and the coaching informed each other? Like, were you out doing something at lunchtime, coaching wise, and you're like, oh, I can actually take this back to the classroom tomorrow, or vice versa?
I found that so I was a sixth class teacher in latter years. And what I can say is that they would go through a wall for you inside in the classroom. The respect they'd have for you inside in the classroom was unreal. I mean, you could leave that classroom for half an hour and you come back and they'll still be in the same spot. What you said, like, you shouldn't underestimate it, really, how much they look up to you as a coach and a teacher at that level. And yeah, no, I suppose character development was the big thing. You know, I used to always talk to them about this. I suppose like similar to your ethics thing, I'd be saying to the kids, look, lads, it's like this. We're going to win, we're going to lose. If we all celebrate every day, we all get medals, that's not life. And I said, look, lads, come 16, 17, 18, if you don't prepare yourselves for losing some games, how are you going to deal with life? Are you going to go for a job at 18 years of age and not get it? Is mammy going to come in and ask the employer, why didn't you give Johnny a job? And I'd never personalize it, but I would explain to them. I said, look, there is a point to this, and sometimes life isn't fair, because as I heard before, like fairness, lads, is me and Damo or me and you training for 3 months solid, and both of us finishing a race at the same time. Of course that wouldn't happen. Genetics take over. And you'd probably beat me by half a mile or whatever. Is that fair? No, but that's life. And I think that's the value of sport at that age. It teaches character, and it also teaches, I'd say to the kids, lads, why should, if Johnny is struggling with his maths, okay, just for argument's sake, Johnny is struggling with his maths, and Johnny gets 0 in his maths, that teacher will give him 0. Doesn't, no two ways about it. Why do we have a situation where Johnny might excel at sport, but we feel the need to only give him a certain amount of time because everybody has to get a go? Shouldn't Johnny have his moment to excel on the sports field when Johnny is struggling with his maths? So that's what I often think about that. The thing where the attitude where everybody gets a medal. I would often say, I get the point, but does that teach anyone to work harder? Does that teach anyone to go off and practice themselves?
To that end, I don't particularly agree with everyone getting a medal, but I do agree more that everyone should have a chance to improve, and often those chances to improve are through time on the field. Now, I get that someone who may be excelling on the pitch and someone who is far away from it, if you were to currently rank some of the weaker players out of 10 and they're at 0, they have no hope of ever getting from 0 to 1 without time on the field and playing. I often think as well that not keeping score in games and the go game system and stuff like that is there to protect players from overly ambitious coaches who think that if I win this under 10 blitz, Jim Gavin's going to give me a call in the morning now and bring me in as a selector. And some are definitely thinking that way. The players, the 8, 9, 10-year-olds, like, even though the parents say to them afterwards, oh, what was the score? Oh, it was a draw. The players know well who won and lost. I think that does go some extent towards developing that resiliency. And if anyone's ever read any of Jonathan Haidt's work, Happiness Hypothesis, Coddling the American Mind, that like that, there is a serious lack of resiliency there in younger people at the minute. And I think they do develop it quite a bit through even, and not just necessarily the score, but even the you and me go for a ball and you win it. That's a little bit of a thing I have to overcome here and now. And I think if coaches can focus on the smaller battles within a game and trying to say, can we come out on top in the majority of those, and how do we come out on top of those, can develop it far more than necessarily the few coaches who focus completely on let's win this game, this blitz, this tournament, and maybe take the emphasis away from that and more so on the smaller battles within.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's fair enough as well. I think there is validity, an awful lot of validity to what you're saying, and to that chain line of thinking. But I suppose in terms of the classroom, the character, my ability to build up relationships, that was the big thing for me, and build up relationships with the children and find out how they saw things. And it's amazing actually how if you're a coach / teacher and you ask a child the day after a match, what do you think? Where do you think we went wrong, quote unquote? And he'd say, well, Mr. Dillon, I think you shouldn't have changed me, or you brought me out to midfield and we should have done this, we should have done that. And it's amazing how sharp some of them are, and you'd open your ears and you'd say, fair enough, yeah, you're right. And also humility. There's many a time I come in the next day and I say after a match, lads, I changed certain thing yesterday. I'm sorry, I was wrong. and they'd be looking at me thinking, Jesus, we're not used to this at all. We're not used to an adult coming around and saying, I'm wrong, I'm sorry. So yeah, I do think that's important. So it's more the informal stuff, more so than we'll say the curricular, the formal curricular subject areas. That's where, and I do think the memories that those children who are now adults, some of them, they've come on like to play development squad level, but they still remember some of those matches that they played in 5th and 6th class. It's funny, isn't it?
That's a really good point about showing that humility and honesty with the players afterwards, and even at a young age, this partly the sense of respect they'll develop for you, but also in a sense you are in a position as a role model, but to show you're willing to do that, it's far more likely to bring that out of them at future situations as well.
But now and again I would put up clips on YouTube of matches, and not them obviously, Kerry matches, and I'd say such and such had the ball here, lads, what do you think you should have done? Just tactically, just throwing it out there, and they're so sharp, like some of them. I should have recycled there, sir. You know what I mean? Just, yeah, it's really interesting now. And some of them would say, sure, look at that, Mr. Dillon, he had to turn back, he'd know left side. So yeah, no, definitely, no, they're sharp.
An area, Karol, that I'm just kind of wondering or thinking a little about, since you mentioned just the children being involved in different types of sports and just the I suppose being open to different things. Now I suppose I'm going to come at this from an athletics perspective, but from my own experience, obviously we're both from Kerry, so I'm speaking more from a knowing the area perspective. But Dewar, for example, would have been a big area when it came to, say, something like community games when I was growing up. And the community games, I suppose, is obviously it was very well known for getting to Mosney and stuff like that for but it was for an array of different things, and it wasn't just the physical sports like your athletics, your basketball, soccer. It wasn't just your mainframe sports. It also included for things like chess, drafts, and stuff like that. That I found that a lot of the more maybe rural places from around the country really grabbed on to the community games as an outlet, or as a way to get their children involved in different sports and different activities, and that a lot of the town area teams didn't necessarily buy in that much, but they were then focused more on their actual, their GA clubs or their soccer club, and I found that they didn't actually have as maybe big of or as varied an experience when it came to different types of sports. Would you have much thought around that? With say since we do know that there is a huge positive aspect to children who've been involved in athletics. You can almost see him. I think the Dervla O'Rourke comment recently on how when she's watching different Gaelic players, that she can see who, from their running technique, who has actually grown up in athletics. But would you have seen much in that line now from, I suppose, teaching, coaching? Would you have seen, how do you feel things are going? Because I do know numbers in community games have been dropping the last number of years, and just looking for maybe your thoughts around that.
No, that's interesting, because I would have been brought up, Damo, slightly before you, in fairness, but where it was kind of old school when you're growing up in Listowel. And it was kind of this attitude that it's J all the way, lads, and you don't want to be playing those foreign games, and you don't want, not even the foreign games there, you don't want it to be interfering with your training for the GA. You'll get burned out. There was this thing sold to you that if you play too many sports, you'll get burned out. And oh my God, it was so wrong. Like, it was so wrong. So thank God now that's changed, and I see a lot of the kids, again, the really good kids, they're playing basketball, not just athletics, they're playing basketball. I mean, if you want to talk about a sport that'll improve your decision making and your spatial awareness, my God, like, basketball's superb. They're playing soccer. And in fairness, the development squad in Kerry, the crossover from the under 14 Kerry development squad guys who would have played Kennedy Cup the same year is huge. And I know there's a massive bit of leeway given to those Kennedy Cup boys that year, where they're like, look, no, it's fine. It's grand, because we know in Kerry that push comes to shove, they'll declare for football anyway. There's a kind of an acknowledgement that for their long-term development, it'll be worth it. So no, I'd be in this imaginary situation here, Demo. If you have, like, we're in Russia or something, and you want to turn this robot into the perfect footballer, I would send him off to all these sports, and then granted it maybe 16 specialize, and it'd be more for his own body and for his own, like, to keep him physically ready, or physically, keep him away from injury, that I would ask him to specialize come 16, because Kerry minors, if they're at Kerry minor level, they're training 3-4 nights a week. You don't want to be, and that's along with gym sessions, you don't want them to be asking him to do 2-3 sessions a week with other sports as well. Suddenly he's out twice a day, maybe on Saturdays, twice a day Sundays. But up until specialization years, I would absolutely recommend all those sports. And you know what? In fairness, as coaches, as GA coaches, we got to suck it up. I often said it to the kids. If you come to me on Monday and say, look, Mr. Dillon, I want to play basketball today, I don't want to play football, I'd say, Jesus, good luck. No problem at all, man. I'd say, we'd love to have you up whenever you want to come back again. You got to respect that as well, that people have their favorite sports.
That's an important humility, I think, that slowly more and more GA coaches are starting to learn. I see a club beside me, they would be a really successful hurling club back through the years throughout Leinster and Wexford, and one of the best coaches I've ever met. He's currently encouraging his own son and daughter to do gymnastics once a week for the winter and athletics year round, and do 10-week blocks of swimming lessons, because he just says long term it'll stand to him so much for their overall athletic development, their overall movement skills, and just imbalances through their whole body. I was so impressed this year in my own club. Like, we're purely hurling. We used to have a junior football team, and then maybe every 8 years we might have an underage football team at under 13 or 15 level. But the lads over the 7s and 9s are really eager when it gets back going to play football this year. And they even changed around when the hurling training was to encourage all the lads to go join the local soccer club. And like that's so unheard of on GA. And when the lads told me they were doing it, I was like, lads, I'm so impressed with this now. It's really going to develop them, get them playing a different sport, develop some new movement skills, everything. Like,
huge. Did you see the FAI Rude Doctor they tried to bring in last year from under 14 level? Kids around Ireland had to specialise.
Under 13, it's the under 13 National League.
That's insane, and it's so short-sighted. From so many different levels in Ireland, of all countries, and then to make them pick at that level, and even scientifically, I believe it's very short-sighted. And they did get a bit of kickback. And have they changed or anything?
No, it's definitely still in place from the under 13s, but I think it's more to give them a level of, not international is wrong, but like inter-county football. So as in it's basically kind of in conjunction with the League of Ireland currently, because the League of Ireland currently is kind of, there's no clear pathway from underage football through to the League of Ireland. So I think that's more their goal, rather than getting them to entirely specialise in football. But I know what you mean, there definitely is gaps in it if it means you can't have multi-sports athletes.
Well, I see that argument, and that's fair enough when you put it like that would be their rationale.
Because there is, I suppose, there's an inter-county GA option there at that age if you're playing hurling or football. There just wasn't one for, and again in rugby it's kind of the same, but rugby they'd nearly be single sports athletes at that stage. But yeah, there's definitely problems with it, but it is that sort of approach. My
fear there is that from a soccer perspective, that you will lose young guys needlessly at a young age when you don't need to, because if you take from a Kerry perspective, look, GA still really is the only show in town, and if you ask a young boy, there's something palpable about the green and gold, you could see a Kerry player walking down the street and say, Jesus, look, that's how close he is. If you make a 13-year-old Kerry lad choose, a lot of times they will choose the Gaelic. So that'd be my take.
I suppose with that in mind, when we're talking about other sports, and I suppose leading back in towards your own research with bilateral play, I mean, if you take basketball, like we've mentioned a few times there, like I played basketball up until I was 18, and a massive part of that was, being equal on both your right hand and left hand, whether it was carrying the ball, whether it was laying the ball up, being able to pass, obviously spatial awareness, all that, fitness, the whole lot. But I suppose looking at your research with bilateral play in football and in Gaelic football, obviously the same passes over for hurling too, but how did you come to linking those sports in with your thesis findings? Or is there anything that from your I suppose maybe even if you gave us a rundown on what your research kind of involved?
So it started off in the March meeting with the supervisor, where we were like, we had a title, but how do we go from here? And I just said to him, look, I know a certain amount of people. Started talking to him informally, and then we quickly came to the realization, let's do a qualitative piece, which involved interviews. So 19 interviews, 14 players, 5 coaches / managers, all had coached or managed at Division 1 level. And there was numerous counties represented. As I said to you, I think all of them had won all Irelands at different levels, and I think there was 9 or 10 All-Stars in there. So that I feel there was a very, very high caliber, and then it took on a life of its own, where these are high caliber guys here. Like, this would be very silly of people on the outside, I feel, to ignore what they're saying and to ignore their experiences. But getting onto the multi-sport thing, I had read the academic research about it beforehand, but it just became a team very quickly along the interviews that these guys were the bilateral lads who would have considered themselves bilateral, were playing soccer, were playing basketball, were playing other sports growing up. That it was a running team. And there was one huge comment from a lad. He said he went into county minor training, and he just said, Karol, what I found, he said, was that the townies who were playing soccer, they were the real bilateral lads on the team. And I felt that was quite a strong quote. There was another guy who was playing basketball. He felt he was extremely proficient on his non-dominant hand directly as a result of basketball. There was another guy, same thing, basketball. His ability to pivot and like turn his backside into players, all as it came about, his fields as a result of basketball. So I wouldn't have said I went in with this idea that I'm going to really drill them on the multi-sport thing. It just became very apparent to them very quickly that this was an ongoing team.
Did you find any reasoning behind, as opposed to just playing soccer, was there something that, like, were they encouraged at 10, 11, 12 to develop both sides? Or was it a case of some of them kind of realised themselves that I should develop my left foot here? Like, I have a cousin who was decent at soccer and football when he was younger, and he said, I should really get good at my left foot here. And it came from being at home playing FIFA or Pro Evo that the players who he could switch onto right or left feet were way more valuable to him when he was playing computer games. So then he decided, maybe the same thing might work for me when I actually play matches.
That's fascinating, though. That's really interesting. There was one guy I interviewed as a pilot interview. He didn't qualify because they weren't Division 1 county, but he was a county player. But he came from a dual county, and he said a massive reason he felt why he was two-sided was this is where you will speak to me, because where I am, a hurley is a weapon, like not not something you play hurling with. So you can take over the expertise on this one. But what he said was, in his hurling area, it was just a given that you were expected to be two-sided with a hurley, and that obviously translated to football. Would you speak to that, actually?
Yeah, it was very, very much encouraged in us that you need to be able to play off both sides. Now, at the same time, like, the coaching I grew up through was very, very drill based, and it was actually quite easy to get away with being one side, because you go out around this corner, you turn your right, and now next time, lads, make sure and turn off your left. But if the coach isn't looking at you, you're just like, I'll just go off my right again, no one know. What I found developed me well on both sides, and I wasn't particularly good at it, but up along underage, I could kind of hit off my left, and I played corner or wing back, whereas the lads who played on the other side could only hit off the right. So I was played on the left a lot. So I had to get good at striking off my left. I think that becomes a constraints-led approach, in that without it being a goal of the coach, I ended up being good on both sides purely because of where I was positioned in games an awful lot. Because soccer possibly had more of a games-based approach, or maybe even they naturally kind of fell into games more and small-sided stuff. Is that why they possibly developed bilaterally as well? Because to get themselves out of challenging situations in the little games they played, they had to be able to go right and left.
That's really interesting there, and what I'm about to say to you will be contradictory, but all I can do is reveal what those interviews revealed. So one player he won a Player of the Year award. He feels since he's had children and retired, he has developed his non-dominant side an awful lot. And I was like, what? And he said, out the back of the house with the children, kicking the ball off the wall, soccer style, and just kicking the ball back, whatever side the ball falls on. And that's why in my coaching now, I feel it's very important to throw the ball. If I'm coaching Damo there now, and I'll throw the ball to him, and I'll say, Damo, you have to kick the ball on whatever side this ball comes to you at. I'm not going to tell you beforehand you have to kick it with your left. So I feel that intuition that we all have inbuilt in us, that instinct, it's hardwired. And it was interesting what he said about the soccer out the side of the house with the kids and just kicking the ball wherever way it falls. But there was a study done. There was a study done about in soccer. 1998 World Cup. He did the researcher Carey. He used sports code to code the matches, and he found that there was a large percentage when players used their non-dominant side, there was success on a very large percentage of cases, over 90%. Yet the players at that level were still extremely reluctant to use their non-dominant side. And I can see your eyes moving up. And he actually said in his conclusion, he's unsure why. Now, I used to pose that question to the players in my interviews. Say, this is a study, blah, blah, blah. Why do you think this is? I'll tell you in a second what a lot of them said, but why do you think it is?
I think it's because the defender is always expecting them to go onto their stronger side, and they're overcommitting to protect that side, and then when they do cut back onto their weaker side, they're like, oh, I wasn't expecting this, and just buys them that extra half a second.
I'd say, to be honest, if it's kind of like, if you think about it at a World Cup level, if you're at a World Cup level, there's a lot on the line that you're going to be like, right, well, I have my dominant foot, I know it's my dominant foot. You're almost hardwired to go to that when you're in. It's almost like a fight or flight response. You're like, right, well, I should hit this with my left foot because I'm left-footed going through. Whereas it takes a smarter player to kind of think twice, slow the game down in their head and go like, right, no. Kind of you have to be a step ahead to think, okay, I can go on to the other side.
Yeah. The big thing, a lot of the players and myself were on similar lines to Shane, which is why, John, I thought that's really interesting what you just said. I can't say who's right and who's wrong. What I can say is that instinct and habit is a huge problem in the coaching of the non-dominant side, especially at senior level. And that's why, if I know a player last year during lockdown who I interviewed who was doing an awful lot of work on his non-dominant side, but I still saw him playing after lockdown, and it was quite evident that he was still going to his dominant side the whole time. And so just because you're practicing your non-dominant side doesn't mean it's effective practice. So there's a difference between practice and deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is mentally very draining, but it's also very, the results are far greater. Ed Collin did a study on this. And with deliberate practice, and what I would say to any guy is, are you simulating pressure? Are you kicking the ball stationary? Are you kicking the ball on the run? Is there anyone mimicking a defender? Going down with just 100 footballs, stationary kicking with your non-dominant side. It's better than nothing, but it isn't going to get you out of the habit of constantly going on to your dominant side. And there was a coach, obviously can't name him, who said that they lost a really important league match in the last couple of years because his player turned onto his dominant side in the last few minutes of the game, and the other team dispossessed him, went up the field and scored a goal. No, it was a National League match. And I turned around to him and I said, how do you, in your view, stop that where the player instinctively goes back to their dominant side, even though they're turning back into trouble? He said, Karol, if you find out the answer, please tell me. Because he was kind of at a loss himself. Now, there was another coach who was absolutely brilliant on that instinct and coaching the instinct, for want of a better word, coach that instinct out of players. And it's what I'm alluding to with Demo and the example I'm giving. His skill assessment and his skill drill was the coach is feeding the ball in to the player, and your first play has to be on the side the ball lands, and tough luck if it's on your non-dominant side. So what he taught me was that the players came to him at the end of the year, and that it's a slow process. Like, it's a very, very slow process, and it demands a lot of patience. So if I'm the skills coach, it demands a lot of patience by management, because you're in S&C, you're in nutrition. I think the results can be a lot more palpable and concrete after 3 to 4 months, relative to where your starting point was. But how do you measure results in skill acquisition? You know, it's a grey area. And as I said to you at the start, Ed Colin is devising skill assessments, but it is an area where I feel it on a broader sense. If you think about S&C, how much it has come on and evolved in the last 20 years, and I'm sure, look, you will say it has more area to cover. I think the area of skill assessment and skill acquisition, it's miles behind. We have so much more to learn. We really, really do. And what I would say as well is that we have to start using a collaborative approach with players, and really good experienced players. You come back to you after 4 to 6 weeks or whatever and say, Karol, X, Y, and Z is working, X, Y, and Z is not working. Okay. One of the coaches, he was brilliant. He said that even though they won a certain thing, the players still came back to him at the end of the year and say, that was good, but we can make it better by doing blah, blah, blah. So that coach taught me what they did then to simulate pressure was that in the example of me kicking the ball to Demo, there was a defender literally on an athletic starting blocks when the whistle was blown. So not alone was he forced to kick on the side he caught the ball on, there was an opposition defender simulating that pressure. So he really, it was becoming instinctive again. I thought that was really good as well. But then you go back to culture, and that same coach told me his manager on the first year, it could have gone 2 ways, he said, because he said that the manager was looking on at these non-dominant skills training sessions. And I believe the sports psychologist happened to be there the same night. And the sports psychologist kind of looked at the manager and said, you're not sold on this. And the manager said, oh, how do you know? He said, your demeanor. And I think the sports psychologist turned around to him and said, well, even if you're not, you've got to pretend that you are, because the players are going to detect that you're not sold on it. And if they detect that, they won't be sold on it. And he said from then on, the manager really, really sold it and really pushed it massively. And then it becomes like a domino effect. Once you start winning titles with those methods, then the players will buy into it massively. One player told me a great story, and I was shocked at this story. This guy, again, multiple All-Stars, player of the year. He told me that he went into a club, a senior club, and it took him 3 months, he said. He went back to the basics. But it like drills, being very anal about the technique of drills, stuff that you might do at juvenile level, the shape of the hand pass, where your hands should be, all that kind of stuff. And he said it took him 3 months, despite his reputation, for the players to be sold on it. And then after about 3 months, he was like, the players were like, okay, fair enough, we can see the point in this. But there's the same player, actually, not manager now, he had a great line where he said, simplicity is not respected anymore. He said, you rock up the training, and he says it feels like players feel they have to be there to be entertained. That players feel that if there isn't 40 cones out in the field, this guy hasn't got a clue what's going on. This guy only knows about 3 drills, And he said, like, sometimes like bluffers. He talked about bluffers, and he said, like, these guys turn up with 40 cones and more cones than the county council roadworks, and you're kind of thinking, you strip it back and you say, well, like, Christ, what's the goal of this drill? The goal of this drill is to improve your kicking on your non-dominant side. Why do we need 50 cones? Okay, now, fair enough. There is research about games-based training and stationary kicking and skills and drills-based training. I get all that. Okay, but I would argue that if a guy is weak enough on his non-dominant side, he's not ready for games-based training on the non-dominant side. I really do. How can you throw him in when he can't kick the ball? By all means, didn't bring it up. And there was one county team where fabulous environment they had created, where internal sessions. No, it was only possession games. It was possession games we've all seen, right? It wasn't rocket science, but they were doing possession games solely on the non-dominant side, where they were rewarding. It wasn't solely possession games, but you were getting extra points for a non-dominant kick pass and a non-dominant hand pass. And he said after a couple of weeks of the management enforcing it, the players began to enforce it themselves. And he said suddenly you didn't need management there anymore. The players were enforcing the standards, and the players were enforcing the scores. I think that's key as well. I think that's huge.
That's really interesting with players enforcing and creating cultures. I know from chatting to, and just to tie it slightly to hurling, that a very successful hurling team from a few years ago who would have been, I suppose, noted for their physicality, when their, just to put an S&C spin on now, when their physical coach came in, started working with them first, they didn't bring it in across the board, everyone had to do gym work, but 5 or 6 players took it on and said, oh yeah, we'll buy into this. Whether it was because of that or just happened to happen, those 5 or 6 players happened to have really good seasons. They've never once had to make any effort to push the gym work since, because those players did it and did well. It's just become commonplace that everyone does this now. It's just what we do. We tried something similar in development squads. Now, I'd been only involved with development squads in hurling, but I saw the football side in Karol a few years ago play the Pella, the indoor one with the big rings at the end of the hall. And they got everyone to wear different colour socks. So your left or your non-dominant leg was a red sock, your dominant leg was a green sock. And when they were playing the first half an hour of games, everything had to be done with, all the kicking had to be done with the red sock. So really, really pushed that two-sided approach. Worked really well for a few weeks, but in one sense it does start to cut down the level of decision making, because if as a defender I know Damien is always going to go onto the red sock, it does make it a little bit easier for me. So I think at the start, really important to instill and get them in the habit. As they do start to become more comfortable on that side, I think open it up again, and then maybe a couple of weeks down the line bring it back in again, and let's reinforce that habit again. So I think mixing and matching there is very important. Have you seen the presentation a few years ago by Mick Bowen on complex skills and that two-sided approach there? What's your take on that? Do you feel that's...
No, I'd be a massive fan of it, because I understand his logic, and it's very, very sound logic, because you alluded to the hurling, how easy it is to cheat a drill at underage. All right, lads, everyone onto their bad side here. And when the coach is looking and then he's gone, he's like, all right. So if you're using 2 footballs, very hard to cheat that drill. Really isolates both sides. So no, I'd be a massive fan of it. Massive fan of it. And it's amazing how he came about by accident. Just less players one night and loads of footballs, So no, fair play to him.
And some really top class players there with him who had quite open minds and were eager to buy into it. Like, I just asked, was it gimmicky? I was trying to tease out what you thought of it. I was at that live. I was blown away by it. I think about every 6 months I go back and watch it again just to remind myself of not so much the drills he's doing or the exercises, but the key concepts behind it, so that if you ever want to go put something like that in place yourself, you can understand the place he's coming from to go where you want to go, wherever you're developing.
And that's why I say about skill acquisition, footballs are gold. So you might rock up to a club and say, we only have 5 footballs. And I'm like, okay, lads, fair enough. Things aren't great, like, but how much are we paying for other services here, you know? And you know, if they're paying X amount of money for the S&C coach, but we only have 4 footballs, I'd be saying, lads, we need to look at our priorities here, you know? And I would like to say, though, in general, the thesis findings, I'll get into them in a second, but no one, certainly not myself, I'm not saying that the S&C is not important. It's absolutely vital, especially at county level, because nearly all participants, the thing they said was that hit them first when they went into inter-county training was the physicality. So there's absolutely no way in the world am I arguing that it's not vital. Absolutely not. What I'm saying is that, and I'll get into it in a minute, if Joe Soap isn't playing well, is he going down to the pitch with a football, or is he going in doing more reps? That's where the problem. And there was a lovely story about a guy. He's a well-known current player. He almost missed the days of being a county minor, where he said you'd rock up to training in those days, you know, do a few stretches, and go out and do your kicking practice for maybe 45 minutes. Formal training would begin, and off you go. He said you would do the equivalent now, and you'd barely make it out in time between strapping, activation work, all these other things. And I'm not saying they're not important, but there are still so many hours in the day. So where is skill acquisition coming into all this? It feels like players have been pulled in different directions, yet the core components, the core principles of the game should be skills under pressure, and your ability to carry out these skills. And if you look at Dublin, in fairness, right, they're a phenomenally fit team, but I have to give them credit. Their ability to carry out those skills on both sides. Subtle things like the non-dominant hand pass, it's huge. The amount of times I've seen them score goals where only a point would have been on if they didn't have a non-dominant hand. The last pass is delivered, the assist is delivered with a non-dominant hand. Subtle things like that. In fairness, you have to respect that by them, you know?
Like the amount of times you would see a score on a Dublin team, and it's, you know, a series of plays: right hand top, left foot hand pass, right hand dummy solo, left hand pass. Like there's such a range of skills there.
And across the 15 too, John, at that, it's not just the dominant, you know, marquee player. It's right across it. Like, look at Cluxton. Cluxton won All-Irelands from in goal, where he's been kicking winning points. I know off the ground frees and stuff, but you know, that's what you see across their 30-man panel, is that it's not just dependent on one or two players, which I think maybe it doesn't transfer down into clubs too often, that there can be that dominant player kind of effect where it's like, oh well, he can do this or she can do that off both sides. I don't need to. It really is it's a full complement of the panel need to be able for it.
On that full complement of kind of desirable skills, if you think of, say, a 14 or 15-year-old now who says, I really want to develop my overall athleticism, gets into the S&C, or sprint and everything like that, and develops, you could have a really competent athlete at 21 or 22, but that might be all they'll have. If you have a 14 or 15-year-old who develops a full range of skills over the course of a few years, and then adds S&C on top of that, around the same age, around 16, 17, 18, 19, that is a seriously potent mix when it comes to a dangerous, talented, attacking, defensive, whatever it is, player when it comes to being on the field.
But there's a massive thing around here at the moment where S&C coaches, there's some brilliant ones out there who really appreciate the importance of skill acquisition and incorporate it into their training sessions. But I see sometimes in recently around here with clubs, juvenile clubs, they're bringing in S&C coaches and for the lockdown, and they're doing these Zoom calls and all that crack. And for 12, 13, 14-year-olds. That's grand. I agree with it. It's fine because you want to keep these kids active. But I'm thinking, where's the ball skills here, lads? Where's the skills program here? Where, like, are you like prescribing any skill training here? And that's where I'd be getting very frustrated in general. No club in particular or anything like that. That's where I'd be getting a little bit frustrated. With kids at that age, you don't want to put the cart before the horse, because as you said there, if you want to get their basics right, their running technique, skill acquisition, diets, I think is huge at that age. And then you want to put the icing on the cake at 16, 17, 18. Brilliant.
I think the likes of fundamental movement skills that are developed through playing a few sports and going to local athletics clubs, running, jumping, throwing, catching, simple stuff like that. It's so much easier then to layer sports-specific skills on top of that. And then your S&C on top of that again, whereas sometimes it becomes a little bit flipped.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So I suppose the one thing I would say to you is the results of the thesis itself. I will outline that. And I suppose I mentioned to my supervisor, Dr. Phil Carney, another Kerry man. Brilliant guy, very generous guy. Amazing academic, but has the humility to let his students and me find our own way as well. And then he'll just, like a very good supervisor, will direct you when need be, The importance of being bilateral was the first team. And then that was the unpredictability. Everyone kind of said, look, Jesus, if you're marking a guy who's bilateral, he'll leave you on your hole. Like, that's, a few of them said that, and it make you look very, very foolish very quickly. The more subtle parts then were the tactical implications of having bilateral players on the team. So by that, I remember one corner forward was telling me, he said, Karol, if I have a centre forward outside me who's one-sided, my runs are 100% dictated by the side he's on. Because I know, for example, if he's left-legged and he's on his right side, I'm not getting that ball. So I have to loop around, or I have to curtail my run. So suddenly you're tactically, you're curtailed because of a guy who's one-sided out the field. Then you talk about other guys who felt you couldn't get away with being one-sided in key areas. Midfield, full forward, centre back, central areas. Another guy, the same guy, actually said that in an All-Ireland semi-final, they were twigged within 5 minutes. They had two right-sided, very heavily right-sided midfielders in midfield, and he said the opposition had them closed down that side of the field within 5 minutes. It was curtains, it was lights out, So, and then the final part, the importance was, the influx of technology and how, if we're doing video analysis of a team, the first thing we'll reach for as coaches is dominant side. And then we'll look for the team patterns and stuff like that. But as outlined by some participants, it is a paradox of intercounty training that it's the first thing you look for in the opposition, but how much do we work on it ourselves? There's an assumption made that, he's a senior now, he should have that. But that's misplaced in a lot of cases, because a guy could be brought into a county setup for a whole host of reasons. He could be brought in for his speed. He could be brought in for his man-marking ability. He could be brought in for his temperament. A whole host of reasons he could be brought in. You can't assume a guy is two-sided because he's in there. So that I think in a lot of cases it was misplaced. One guy told me last year they were doing hand passing drills in inter-county training on a non-dominant hand, and he was mortified. He said it felt so alien to him. He said it was a juvenile drill. It was 100% the right drill, he said, because he couldn't do it, which meant he should be doing it. But he said it felt so alien to him. And he said, we shouldn't assume. He actually said, and this speaks to you, he said, we are so professional in S&C, nutrition, all these areas. Yet here I am at whatever age, won't say, and the non-dominant hand pass felt so alien to him. And he was asking himself that question. I said to another player then, I said, if you're analysing, he was a back. I said, if you're analysing the opposition player, and his ticks, he dummy hops, he dummy solos to get onto his good side, or vice versa. I said it follows logically that he's doing the same to you. And he was like, it blew his mind. So I kind of said, what are you doing to counteract that? You know, because that's how we have to evolve as a player. You know, we have to evolve. I know if I'm playing club football in Kerry at Division 1 level, I mean, Damo, you'll speak to this. I mean, it's roughly the same players you're coming up against year after year. You know those players fairly well. You know, you have to bring something new to the table, and so that was interesting. The second team then was the I suppose the limitations or the challenges in developing bilateral players. This speaks to the volunteerism of GAA. Some clubs have brilliant coaches, and others have parents who become coaches. And it's sometimes the luck of the draw. It's hard to criticize because they're volunteers. So what players found was there was a huge inconsistency. So you might have the under-12 guy under John Murphy, he was outstanding. The under-14 guy under Shane O'Rourke, never looked
Extra
at it.
outstanding.
And Damien O'Sullivan then just wanted them to work on like bench pressing. So you know, that was kind of what was they found. It was very frustrating, and not just inconsistency amongst coaches at club level, even inconsistency amongst county teams. So you might have a manager coming in county senior, a big push for it. That guy gets replaced after 2 years. He was like, "Nah, we don't have time for that." Another guy came in and he told me a story where he really pushed it at the start of the year at county senior level. But he said come May, April, June, excuse me, that's my months in the wrong order. April, May, June even, he was saying that you were firefighting at that point in the season. You know, he felt you didn't have time to be working on that stuff. You're implementing game plans. You're saying who's fit, who's injured, who's this, who's that, you know. And I would argue that was the time where you really needed to be doing skills. Now, contrast to that, one coach said to me that without fail, they did 20 minutes at county senior training. Without fail, for 3 years, 20 minutes on a non-dominant side. And to be honest, it showed. So the inconsistency was a massive issue. Atmosphere and environment in the squad is another problem. So by that, if I'm implementing non-dominant skills or training, I have to take the hit as a manager and say, right, this is going to go pretty pear-shaped for a while until guys improve. So I got to keep my mouth shut. Okay, I got to accept that standards will not be as high. So I can't be, you know, saying demanding. The same goes for your peers. Okay, one player said, I said, would you ever try the non-dominant side in that drill? And he mentioned one of the big characters in the dressing room. And he said, Jesus, no, man, because like you're shitless of the drill falling down because of you. So you're certainly not going to chance that drill or that skill with the non-dominant side. You're not going to risk it. He said, because it's dog eat dog. I mean, they're your teammates, but it's dog eat dog. And the other thing as well, which was strange, is that you're not going to go to management and say, can we do more training on the non-dominant side? Because in a way, you're kind of telling your manager, I'm shit on the non-dominant side. And you're almost making him even more aware of it. So it's very much individual. Even though it's a team game, you go into counties training and it's very, very individual in a way. So then there was a great story. I remember there was county senior training, an AB game. A guy was brought in and the manager was refereeing the game. And he blew up the game and he said to player X, that was a non-dominant hand pass. Work on your non-dominant hand. And a year later, the same player was brought back in to make up the numbers in the AB game. And the same thing happened. The manager blew up again and absolutely roasted him. He said, I told you 12 months ago to work on your non-dominant hand. Here we are. So in a lot of cases, it's left up to the players themselves to work on it. And that speaks to what I said to you earlier on in the conversation. If they're being pulled in different directions, there are only so many hours in the day. Players will rightly argue, where do I have the time here, especially at that level. So the environment was a huge thing. Consistency was a huge thing. Expectation that they should already have it was a huge thing. Lack of expertise in coaching was a huge thing. And by that, you have the best S&C guys being brought in, best nutritionists being brought in. Football coaches are largely volunteers. It's changing, but it's largely volunteers. They're friends of the manager. They're brought in. Lip service. I go over to Damo there and say, Damo, you need to work on your non-dominant side. Walk away from him and don't talk to him again for 6 months. What am I doing in those 6 months to help Damien improve his non-dominant side? What concrete advice am I giving him? What drills am I giving him? It's not acceptable to just walk away from him and not talk to him again for 6 months and say, what have you done? Okay, am I helping him? It was a lovely story about a guy who said that this is the exception, he said, rather than the rule, of a guy who, this is really detailed advice now, where the player was in training one night and the selector after 3 weeks came over to him in county training and said, I've been watching you there now for the last 3 weeks, he said, and you're making the same run to the same corner so you can get onto your favourite leg. Is there any chance you might do that on the other side? And he said, Jesus, he's 100% right. It wasn't rocket science, but at least it was detailed advice. A county player has said to me, he said, why aren't we at the stage in Gaelic football where we are so reliant on our kicking? It's football. Why don't we have kicking coaches in? In rugby, they have kicking coaches. And we have so many other coaches in football, rightly. But the skills are kind of been left. They've been left to players, they've been left to managers. And I would ask as well, how many coaches and managers in GA know the correct technique about the shoulder facing the post? Stuff like that you might, how many would video a player and his kicking technique and strip it back from him?
That's a really good point. As I mentioned earlier about the PE, and one of the assessment points is a project where the student picks their favourite activity. They have to do an overall analysis and pick 4 points they want to improve. And one of my top students last year wanted to improve her kick. So she did an analysis of it. And when we broke down the hook kick versus the punt kick, she couldn't actually figure out which one she was attempting. They were that crossed over with each other. So she had to go away and research it herself, realised she was trying to attempt a hook kick, but was doing it largely through the punt. Designed a little 6-week training program for herself, reanalysed at the end, a nice little side-by-side video comparison on Huddle. Said she actually learned a huge amount from it. She was 18 years old, has played on numerous development squads up along. Why is this only being picked up now by herself? I think that's an important point you said there as well on why don't we have kicking coaches. Possibly because it's so many people getting involved in the voluntary capacity. Look at what the top teams are doing. The top teams aren't really focused on the basic skills because they expect so many players to already have them down, so overlook that. Also because possibly in rugby, American football, all like that, you can directly measure the success of a kick to points on the scoreboard, and that if your kicker is better, they're hitting touch here, they're putting it over the post here. Whereas because it's such an ingrained skill in Gaelic football, just kind of expect so many people to already have it.
It's kind of a specialist position in those sports as well, so i.e. they deem it a specialist coach.
Yeah. No, that's the specialist position is a valid point. I just feel that for coaches, they put coaches on the in GA coaches, they want to coach coaches, and level 1, level 2, level 3. It's all very well to teach them how to do different drills and stuff like that. Who's actually doing the technique here? Strip it back again.
To be fair, I've done my award too in hurling, and the session we had on the skills of the game was top class. The shooter we had in on the day broke them down really well, gives all a really good understanding, and showed us how to spot the common mistakes, how to correct them, not just in tell the players what to do, but how to put this into an activity. So I will say there are some excellent shooters. I'm not saying this because I'm on myself. I'm by no means excellent, but there are some excellent shooters out there that do some really good work on the skills. I think you alluded to it there as well. While, again, very difficult to measure, the importance of a really good coach is worth their weight in gold to a team. And I think we're starting to see it a bit more in the last couple of years due to the success of All-Ireland winners in both codes, that when you strip it back, you can see there are some coaches there who really, really know what they're doing, and you can see their impact on the teams they're working with as well.
Yeah, I think Jason Sherlock was huge in Dublin. Absolutely huge. I had a lot of respect for him now. You know, you have to respect guys who are innovative and want to bring stuff from other sports. I like that. I like looking at the Dubs off the ball and looking at their patterns. And Paul Kinnerk, who actually read, he did have a little bit of an input into my thesis. He read through it at the end. You got to respect what he's doing with hurling as well. I mean, he's a wealth of knowledge and yeah, really good, really, really good guy. So you are right in terms of there's an acknowledgement that coaches have a bigger impact or a bigger role to play as the years go by. Absolutely, yeah.
And you can see Paul appreciating the academic side as well, having done his own PhD in games-based coaching. Just on that, the development of your own thesis, when you were originally putting that together, what eventually guided you towards the qualitative end in the interviews as opposed to more quant-based stuff? Was it personal preference, or did you feel that I think this would best answer the question I am trying to find an answer to?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I think it was more, I wanted to be different. I wanted to be original. There had been quantitative type 1 studies done, as I said. One was in Australia for AFL, elite AFL players. And they found, again, for example, that even the elite guys, they were willing to go to a harder angle to get onto their good side rather than take the easier shot with their non-dominant side, which is amazing, again, at that level. And I really wanted to drill down and ask why. I wanted to drill down and get the why and have an original piece. Because the best of my knowledge is the first qualitative piece of its nature, where you're asking players about their experiences and the why and the how. And then another reason, to be honest, was my own personal relationships and my ability to get access to these people, because I suppose I was in a relatively privileged position. That one thing led to another, and not many. It's not that I'm great friends with any of these people. I'm not, but I also knew that not many would have had the access that I did. And what I would say, if anyone is looking on and say, how can you sell your research? It's not Karol Dillon. I will say you would be silly, in my view, to ignore the caliber of these people and what they said. Okay, because I don't believe you can get a higher caliber of participants than I got. And that's nothing to do with me. I might have put it together with Phil Carney, but it was just they had really, really good insights about their experience. So that's how it morphed into the qualitative work.
So on that, Karol, just so that's obviously like an excellent piece of work, but from, say, if we talked about Dublin and how they're kind of quite a bilateral team to look at. So when you look at that and then say someone like a Dermot Connolly, who was noticeably exceptional bilaterally, even in a team like that, do you think it's possible that going forward that could be kind of the standard they should be aspiring to? Or is it more that he was somewhat of a very big talent in the area, or a bit of both?
I believe you're talking about natural skill there, but you broke up, you froze for about 10 seconds there about Dermot Connolly.
Sorry, no, so it's more not necessarily just his ability, but like I suppose that sheer confidence to just be willing to try. It doesn't matter if it's on his right or his left side, he's going to try the same pass, and it's kind of what his eye sees rather than tailoring to the talent of either side. So he said in the past that he's not ambidextrous, he kind of just puts the work in. So do you think that's the level that we should kind of aspire to be to, or that's more of an exceptional talent?
That's so many. I'm glad you said all that now, because there's so many things in that I wanted to address. Dermot Connolly actually has come up. Okay, this is nothing so much to do with, I'm not giving away names or anything like that. This is, as a fan, everybody would know who the real bilateral players are over the years. Okay, so I'm not giving away much. Shane Walsh in Galway is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Dermot Connolly, ridiculous. In Kerry, Morris Fitz, ridiculous. Okay, you know, these fellas, it's no secret. Like, so that's really interesting. And I asked one of the players in the thesis about natural talent. I thought he was going to hit me. And you know him. He's so well known, and he got really visibly angry at the idea of natural talent, because he was like, I put thousands and thousands of hours into this. He said, wherever I went as a child, there was a ball with me. You know, he felt it was dismissive or disrespectful to his practice. And another participant said, I can remember verbatim, he said, whatever you get at intercounty, you earn. And another guy, brilliant interview, he said he was in college, I won't say the college, and he was doing his kicking practice, and it was 30 kicks. So he said you had to get 30 kicks over the bar in a row. And if you missed on 29, you had to start at 1 again. And he said there was a poem. He said there was a poem we did for the Leaving Cert, Hopkins poem. Sheer plod, I think Down Silly on Shine. And he said every time I used to retrieve the ball, I used to think of the poem, Down Silly on Shine, Down Silly on Shine. And I remember verbatim what he said, because that plough, he said, will be shining. Basically, the plough on the ground works so hard, it's shining. And he said, I'll be fucking shining come All Ireland final day. That poem was going through his head nonstop. It's amazing, actually, how these guys, I don't profess or claim to be friends with them. They were very good to me, very generous with me with their time. But what I can say, the work they put in, absolutely crazy. And you'd have to say good luck to them, you know. Definitely. These guys work so hard. The Diarmuid Connolly's, the 10,000 hours and all that kind of crack, it's a really, really deeper philosophical question, and I put it into my discussion. Of course, there are more talented guys than others. I think that, you know, but what I would say, we shouldn't underestimate the absolute obsession of these guys either. There's a thing in academia called rage to master, and that's your inherent wiring to be the best you can be. There was a lovely part of an interview as well where a guy who to me was ridiculous, but he said, it wasn't growing up that I wanted to play for my county. It wasn't that I wanted to win All-Stars. It wasn't that I wanted to win All-Irelands. I wanted to master the game. I wanted to be known that I could do it in rain. I wanted to be known that I could do it in sunshine. I could do it with my left. I could do it with my right. And he said, did I succeed? No. But he said that was constantly the goal. So it was interesting to hear their mentality. Yeah, I know that's a long way around the Diarmuid Connolly thing, but it touched on a lot of areas, to be honest.
No, I definitely think, because I'd agree, I think it is kind of that huge work rate, because even, this is a completely different sport now, but even I watched interviews with Ronnie O'Sullivan, and he can famously kind of play either side, which is it's rare enough in snooker because it's to some degree unnecessary. But even people ask him, like, why would you do that? And he goes, why wouldn't you want to be able to play off both sides? Like, how is it going to harm me? And you're kind of, when it's put that simply, you're like, well, geez, if it comes in handy once or twice around, surely it's worth doing. And it's just having that dedication to kind of put the hours in.
That's really interesting, because my research is around positive psychology and well-being, and the closest I can get to a definition of it is around engagement, purpose, meaning, and mastery of what you're doing. And it's not necessarily mastering something, but that journey to mastery. That's true well-being or true positivity or self-actualizing, and to show that that's what they're after, as opposed to the extrinsic accolades like All-Irelands, All-Stars, county medals, all like that. They probably then have a much truer sense of meaning or self-worth after not so much mastering those, but trying to master those and going through the journey, as opposed to winning anything.
The same player actually, it was fascinating. It was a serious eye-opener, because I mean, I was growing up, all I wanted to do was play for Kerry, like, you know, it wasn't anything about mastering anything. so it was, you know, they've just a different mentality at that level. It's fascinating to listen to him. But the same player actually, it was like poetry, saying to be honest, I felt he was two-sided, and he said he felt he was two-sided. He said once it was like chess in his head with his opposition marker. The marker would dive in and would almost say, "Go on, have a go off your bad side," and he'd throw it over. And he said the very second on the second or third or fourth ball, the marker dived in. He said, "I fucking have, it's all over." And there was another part in where he said like that they'd play a certain team over the years who would have dropped players back. He said, "I used to love that." He said, "I used to get a bigger buzz out of setting up a score than actually getting the score. I love the challenge, it's just, it was quite interesting." But he said, like, there was another guy who said, you have the ability to, if you're two-sided, you can fool. These are his words now. He said, you can fool to fool to fool to fool, and it is, I know what he's saying. Because in the opposition is like, is he going to dummy me or pretend to dummy me or shoot or pretend to shoot or whatever, and it goes on and on and on. So, yeah.
That's so interesting the way they create those extra new challenges for themselves within a game when they've kind of sussed out what the defence is about. I was at a presentation by Dr. Damien Young at the Games Conference a few years ago where he talked about so many decisions, so little time. It was largely around hurling, but the amount of decisions they have to make in such a short space of time in an All-Ireland final. And he says, like, you've all these challenges or puzzles you have to try and solve. And without being able to play off both sides, automatically the options you have to solve those are just cut in half. You could potentially have 8, and that's just cut down to 4 by not being able to do all your skills off both sides. Last thing I'm going to ask, because we're conscious of your time now, you've been absolutely brilliant, but to put my researcher hat on, now that you've done this investigation, you've an idea around what is involved in research, the different methods, where do you think the field of skill acquisition in terms of research, not necessarily to bring it back to sport, needs to go next for GA and specifically Gaelic football? And just loosely, if you could touch on, you've said around some people now who are creating tests for skills in Gaelic football, how applicable at times are they? Because it can be very, very hard to set up the particular context they'll be used in and the kind of chaotic nature around test it. Are they worth doing it under 10, 11, 12, see can they do stuff off both sides and we integrate more into games, or can it be more valid further up the chain?
Primary level, we won in the school. We won 2 Munster skills competitions in the school, which I think they're very valuable to get players focused on practicing at that level. So what I would say that absolutely, right, that. Now, in terms of their efficacy, they're limited enough, and I can see their limitations at that level. So now that I'm implementing skill tests at the level I'm at now, there has to be an element of timing. They have to be under pressure, and that if they don't get their shot off in a certain amount of time, bang, gone. Because they can't have all day to take the shot in any skill assessment. There has to be a chaotic nature to the thing. There has to be, I know in basketball skill assessments, they do bring in, there was research done on one skill assessments where they bring in one opposition player. You are right though, it's not easy to mirror that chaotic nature and to standardize it. That's the standardization, because again, let's just say I bring in a back to mirror a back. There's only so many times he can mirror being a back, and then you bring in another back, and then that guy will say, well, he's fucking faster than my back, you know what I mean? And it's a valid point. So yeah, that it's not easy, but I would argue that there has to be a clock. And one coach who spoke about the starting blocks said 3 seconds was his thing. So you throw the ball to the player, on the whistle, the guy in the starting block mimics the defender. He takes off, and you have 3 seconds to score or 0 on that. So that's one thing I would say there. In terms of research going forward, well, the PhD idea we have, Phil and myself, funding dependent, is a limitation / criticism you could throw at my study was that it was retrospective. It was heavily reliant on people's past experiences. And there's no question that there has been a change for the better at development squad level, more towards developing non-dominant side. I have to acknowledge that. And is more standardized, is more consistent, and that's absolutely fair. the ladies' game, we would like to go into that. So the plan is really to go into development squad level at tier 1, tier 2 level, compare and contrast, do that with the ladies' game, do video analysis of games and say, right, well, these are their experiences at development squad level. This is what senior games are producing at division, at tier 1 and tier 2. And the key differential to our idea is we actually want to implement interventions. So we want to put in 3 different levels: juvenile, 20, 21-year-olds, and 30-year-olds, or else cut it down to 2. And the rationale behind that would be, okay, firstly, you would put them training, just simplifying here, you'll say, okay, I want you to work on your non-dominant side for 20 minutes, 4 days a week in that group for 4 months. And then we'd do the same with the other group. And I want to see, is there a palpable difference between the juvenile, how much they improve, versus the adults? Because there is a conception, or there is an idea that it's very, very difficult to improve the non-dominant side in your mid-20s. I want to put that to the test. And I also want to put the complex skills to the test as well, scientifically. So that would be an idea for an intervention. And that would be the final part of our PhD study.
Yeah, no, that's unreal, Karol. Hopefully in about a year and a half, when you're knee deep in second round of your lit review, just after going through the first intervention, and your hair is being pulled out trying to figure out how to analyse and do all your statistical tests, we'll get you back on here to see some potential initial findings and everything like that. But thanks a million for your time. And if you've got anyone to just shoot with where people can find you, or maybe see some where your work might have been done, then let us know.
No, as I say, I'm with Legion now in Kerry at the moment, which is great. Like it's given me access to really good quality players.
And Damo.
And Damo, yeah.
In fairness, it is. No, it has. I mean, it is giving me access because, okay, you have your well-known county players, but at the end of the day, it is a senior club. And it does give you an idea of best practice going forward. Plus, I'm working with like Pat Flanagan, who would be well known as well. So that is good. It was an eye opener to me to see these. I mean, these players, how early they come to training. You know, you name training for 7:30, and these guys are strolling in doing their activation work or whatever at 6:30, 7:15. So that's where I'm there at the moment. As I say, I'm talking to you well at the moment. I had an article in the Irish Examiner before Christmas, and I'll just take it from there. I would say to anyone though that it is in the Karol Dillon commentary. This thesis, I think, this research is a voice to the 19 participants, and I think people would be wise to listen to what they said. And I suppose the final thing I will say is just from underage, from 11s, 12s, 13s, 14s, as coaches, including myself, that's our window for skill. And let's strip it back and just give them a football, you know. So, lads, thanks very much. Or a horn. I'm sorry. Again, it's like, what's that? Thanks very much to the thought of you for the time you gave me and the opportunity. And we'll talk again, please God.
Lovely. Thanks a million,
Karol. Thanks a million.